In Tacos America, simply being a scientist is becoming an act of resistance. NASA's Langley Research Center has seen a dramatic 40% reduction in its workforce thanks to President Taco's proposed 2026 budget. But it's not just Langley that's hemorrhaging workers. That same story is playing out all across the nation. Yet the folks who work behind the scenes at NASA, well, they aren't going out without a fight. And as it turns out, internally, NASA has seen its fair share of resistance to inequality and racism. Now, there are some people out there who would claim that space exploration is useless for most of us on the ground. After all, for those of us more terrestrial types, how does a bunch of egghead scientists studying quasars losing their jobs affect you? Well, as it turns out, a whole freaking lot. When you look at the facts, NASA's contributions to our society are staggering. The advances made during the Apollo program alone gave us email, the integrated circuit, scratch-resistant lenses, cordless tools for all you DIY people out there, fire-retardant clothing, your children thank you, memory foam, my back thanks you, freeze-dried food, long-distance marathon runners thank you, wireless headsets that 10-year-olds use to troll us all on Fortnite, and magic space blankets. In addition to this, how about the cell phone camera that we rely on to document our masticating rituals? The microwave, LED lights, the technology that makes your Nike Air trainers possible. No, they are not a sponsor. Yes, I would accept them as a sponsor. Water purification systems, dust busters, ear thermometers, the jaws of freaking life, artificial limbs, adjustable smoke detectors, portable computers, CAT scan technology, landmine removal tech, computer mouses, computer mice, computer mises, baby formula, and home insulation. And as my mom shouted upon hearing this first draft, don't forget Tang.
Have a blast. Have some Tang.
So suffice to say, NASA is an invaluable asset to our society, as are all of the sciences that help keep us safe and keep the wheels of progress turning. And while there is some celebration of that fact in pop culture, well, the pop sci narrative tends to venerate only the men who took those first pioneering flights and steps into the greater cosmos above this blue obloit spheroid that we call home. The truth is, though, while the astronauts that you've heard about for decades are undoubtedly important, you have Black women to thank for many, if not all, of the advances that I just listed off. Because, well, if it wasn't for them, then the household names of Buzz, Neil, and all the rest would never have had a snowball's chance in hell of making it to the moon and back. There is also an incredible book written about them that you should check out. It's called Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly, and it will be in the description and pinned comment along with the sources for this show. But before we can talk about these amazing women featured in Hidden Figures, we need to turn the clock back just a little bit to the era leading up to World War I, and I will tell you about the formation of NACA and NASA, because we're about to blow your mind. So let's turn our attention back to Langley Research Center, which makes its home in Hampton Roads, Virginia. Langley Research Center got its start as one of the earliest military bases devoted to American air supremacy. I mean, developing weapons and aircraft to fight what many thought would be the next frontier of warfare, the sky. General Billy Mitchell once said, "The first battles of any future war will be air battles. The nation winning them is practically certain to win the whole war." I mean, I'd say he was right, given the hundreds of hours of documentaries that our grandparents watched detailing the epic dogfights that took place throughout the First and Second World Wars. Now, under the guise of air supremacy, we also made some highly questionable choices, like Project Paperclip, which aimed to bring over 1,600 high-ranking German scientists in the wake of the Nazis' regime's defeat. We wanted them rockets that Wernher von Braun and his team were working on, and we were willing to do, well, pretty much anything to get them, which this story we are going to be returning to very soon. Keep that in mind as we continue. Langley remained a military base in the hands of the Army Air Service, the Army Air Corps, and the Army Air Forces from 1918 through 1941. And in 1947, it would become part of the United States Air Force, taking on the name Langley Air Force Base a year after yet again changing branch hands. At this base, the National Advisory Center for Aeronautics, or NACA, or NACA, sprouted from the need to have a dedicated government organization tasked with developing and testing aircraft in 1915 as World War I raged overseas. By 1958, Congress would pass the National Aeronautics and Space Act, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, would then take over NACA's operations. Okay, so while Langley Air Force Base is not technically the same facility as NASA Langley Research Center, they are very, very much related, with both of them being located in Langley, Ustick, which was originally known as Langley Field. Now, NASA's space program that we love evolved out of U.S. military operations. You get it. Now, what's not generally talked about in the documentaries about the moon landing or any of the missions that comprise the Mercury or Gemini program leading up to it is that the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA, was established right in the middle of Jim Crow era. Now, if you're too young to remember what Jim Crow was, or your school simply forgot to teach you, it was basically a racist caste system in the American South, although it certainly wasn't limited to just the South. Black people were barred from interacting in white spaces. They had separate bathrooms, fountains, parks, and entire communities. And usually these spaces were in disrepair or considerably less swanky than what the whites could use. So dumb. Now, it wasn't just institutional, however. It was a part of the culture. The idea that Black people were somehow inferior was fed to the masses by these annoying white preachers who claimed that God had chosen their race. I feel like there's something in the Bible about you're not allowed to actually speak for God. That seems like a pretty big swing, right? So it was promoted, though, also by eugenicists and social Darwinists, which is not the same thing as the Darwin evolution, and it was a form of racial pseudoscience that fails to understand anything about the actual science of evolution. They just took the cool name. Well, they believed that science somehow proved their insanity, and baffling. Now, bringing it back to Project Paperclip and those 1,600 German scientists, it probably shouldn't come as a surprise that many of those German scientists were members of the Nazi Party, even if some of them only jumped on the bandwagon because cowardice is often, in their mind, the safest option. Boo, cowards. For many American officials, the fact that some of those card-carrying former Nazi Party members were true believers, that's just an inconvenient truth that needed to be swept under the rug. And that included Dr. Werner von Braun, who was a Nazi Party member and SS officer who had at least some involvement with the effort to force people in concentration camps to work on his missiles against their will. After being welcomed into the United States, his rockets, especially the Saturn V, would later help NASA reach the moon. So I'm going to ask you to consider for a moment, what is the difference between a Nazi's beliefs and those preachers that were promoting Jim Crow eugenics? A loud pause. The audience gasps. It becomes clear why specifically these people would be easily assimilated, if not full-on welcomed, into a military project mainly based in the American South. But what exactly did those Germans immigrate into? In 1935, 5 women launched, you get it, the first ever computer pool at what would become Langley Research Center, and it turned heads. Now, why would it turn heads? Those same preachers that were promoting Jim Crow era pseudoscience nonsense, they also were serving up plenty of sermons advocating for womankind's role as their God intended, master of her house, and, well, really not much else. And oh, what a surprise, it turns out that those Nazis also believed that women should be regulated only to the household as well. Does that sound like anything else that you've been seeing rolling across your TikTok feeds? Tradwives. Let's turn our attention, though, back to these women computers. Now, when you hear the word computer, you're probably thinking of a bunch of machines as big as rooms with lots of spinning tubes and blinking lights and vacuum tubes. But computers back in the 1930s, they weren't mechanical just yet. They were people. Back then, women didn't have many entry points into the sciences. Most engineers were men. And if a woman had a degree in any of the letters that made up STEM, science, technology, engineering, or mathematics, well, they were more than likely going to be regulated to teaching, regardless of their talent. But what was thought to be a temporary project, like an experiment, if you will, it turned into something much more vital to the going-ons at Langley and Lacie and beyond. Now, here in this enclave of science, paradoxically to the Jim Crow culture and narrative of the time, NACA sought out Black women to work as human computers in the 1940s thanks to an executive order issued by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1941. So these women became known as the West Area Computers and colored computers, because you can't spell progress without some racist interjecting their nonsense. Oh, wait, okay, what? Refocus. Here we go. While this might sound like the beginning of the end for Jim Crow era oppression at NASA and the culture that denigrated Black people for no reason, you would be sort of right, but also sort of very wrong, because there's a whole host of caveats that come with the advent of Black computers. First, men were paid more, even those who held degrees in similar fields. And second, those women, they were referred to as sub-professionals, the engineering and scientific equivalent of unskilled labor, if you will. But men get to be professionals, y'all. The incredible Black women who worked as computers at Langley had to deal with the sexism that their white colleagues dealt with, plus a big ol' helping of racism on top of it, with segregated offices, bathrooms, cafeteria, and vigorous fights for raises and opportunities for promotions to positions that were often offered to their white male counterparts instead, or despite them being often far less qualified, as we will soon learn. Now, these Black women could have capitulated. They could have let their employers walk all over them at the first sign of pushback, and they could have bent the knee, but they didn't. No. These women found ways to resist institutional and cultural racism in actions that would pave the way for real change. Miriam Mann, badass that she was, removed segregated seating signs, refused to eat in the designated Blacks only section of the mess hall, and refused to use the colored girls' bathrooms. Katherine Johnson was so freaking smart that she calculated the flight trajectories for the Mercury program, notably Alan Shepard's Freedom 7 mission. And the following year, she did it again with Friendship 7, which then made John Glenn the first American to complete a full orbit of this blue planet of ours. In fact, Glenn specifically requested Johnson for the mission. Get the girl to check the numbers. Get the girl. Not the woman, not go get Miss Johnson, not go get Engineer Johnson, not go get Mathematician Johnson. No, go get the girl because, of course, sexism is everywhere. Keep an eye out for it. This is a scientist. This was a scientist that was actually having her moment, right? This is an actually highly trained mathematician, and he doesn't even use her name. That, to me, it's just so aggravating, the microaggressions. Once we stop normalizing it, it'll get better. Katherine Johnson's math was also instrumental in making the Apollo program's ultimate mission of landing on the moon a success. Remember that the next time that someone claims the moon landing was fake. Hell no, it was not, because Black women made it happen. Mary Jackson was so talented at her job as both a human computer and supersonic flight mathematician. I mean, just think about the implications of those titles for a moment in relation to a very entrenched Jim Crow America. She was offered an opportunity to break the segregation rules and take engineering classes at a whites-only facility because her talent. We're always looking to help good talent rise up. That should be the true American way. And she made history in 1958 when she became NASA's first ever female Black engineer. Dorothy Vaughan was so damn smart, she was offered a full tuition scholarship to Wilberforce University at the age of 15. And later, she turned down a graduate course at Howard University to become, what else would you think, a human computer at Langley. This was in 1943. Year after year, she was overlooked for promotions, a very common experience among these talented Black women. But her perseverance paid off 6 years later in 1949 when she became the first Black woman to hold a management position at NACA. And the timing of this accomplishment is especially important because Langley wouldn't even begin desegregating its facilities until 1958, 9 years later. There is a very high chance that those German science bros worked under this inspiring manager. Christine Darden may have started work at Langley in 1967, years after desegregation began. But just because something started doesn't mean that it gets completed quickly. She still faced racism and was constantly passed over for job opportunities. But instead of keeping the peace and her head down, she confronted a supervisor and was immediately transferred to the engineering section of the facility. Darden went on to earn a doctorate in mechanical engineering from the George Washington University and ended up spending 25 years going boldly where no engineer had gone before by studying, read experimenting, in aerodynamics, supersonic flight, and sonic boom minimization, which totally sounds like a Street Fighter tech. You win. Langley, though, wasn't the only facility where Black women were leading the charge either. Annie Easley began her career in the NACA era with 3 other African Americans at the Lewis Research Center in Ohio. This was in 1955, and to say these 4 African Americans were outnumbered, that would be an understatement. These 4 were up against 2,500 other employees in the middle of Ohio. Now, being outnumbered didn't stop Easley from working as a rocket scientist, computer scientist, or mathematician. As team lead, Easley helped design the software that made the Centaur upper stage rocket do its thing. Its thing being launching satellites and probes into the orbit around Earth and the depths of space. Melba Roy Mountain began work at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland in 1959, leading a team of computers tracking the Echo satellites. And y'all, it sounds so weird to just list off the accomplishments of being able to calculate a spacecraft flight path or pinpoint where in orbit these satellites were without the aids of calculators or mechanical computers, like it's some dispassionate factoid on a listicle website from the early 2010s, because it's freaking superhuman what these Black women did. To put that superpower into perspective, it's important to understand that doing this requires being able to factor in the gravitational influence of all the other planets and the moon on the Earth, and then adjust the calculations. This is something that stressed the heck out of the mechanical computers at the time. In modern terms, imagine your computer giving you a blue screen of death because you have way too many tabs open and Google Earth, and you decided to start rendering, a 4-hour video about history or some sort. The computers just couldn't handle it at the time. At NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, Jeanette A. Sissom, this woman, she assembled a report detailing magnetic activity on the freaking sun. This was in 1964, more than a decade before NASA officially sent Helios 1 and 2 to study it all up close and personal like. Although, personal is relative when you're dealing with something as big and hot as the freaking sun. And we've only just now begun to send probes closer to the sun's surface in recent years. Jeanette Bonus volunteered to be an equal employment opportunity officer. Quote, "Why not?" she said. "Maybe I can help in some way, so I'll do it for a time." You didn't get evaluated on it. It was just extra work. She navigated warnings from her supervisors, like, "Management's a little unhappy about all the complaints that you're handling," said a top female supervisor. "We're afraid for you. We're very happy with the work that you're doing. We're glad that you're doing it, but we don't want you to be hurt." So she went on to earn her PhD, continue speaking up, write an article for the National Technical Association called Equal Employment Opportunity and the Supervisor, a Counselor's View, which stated that many discrimination complaints could be avoided through adequate and meaningful communication. She also contributed to the Atmospheric, Magnetospheric, and Plasmas in Space project and then retired from NASA in 2005. The examples of these incredible Black women standing up to injustice and fighting for their rights in ways both big and small are so powerful because for many of us who grew up in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, we have taken our freedoms as self-evident. We have taken them for granted. And now there is a real and present threat to those freedoms in the form of the rise of the GOP and MAGA-led fascism. And many people, they're not sure what to do. But I am telling you right now, look to what those human computers did to shatter prejudices, stereotypes, and lead the way to a brighter future. Because they didn't just lie down and let the boots goose step on them. They fought back. And today, hundreds of NASA scientists and leadership, both past and present, are currently resisting Taco's regime by signing the Voyager Declaration, a letter sent to the new acting head of NASA, Interim Administrator Duffy, in response to the Taco regime's, quote, dismantling cuts and devastating attacks on NASA's program and missions. This letter seeks to urge Duffy to reject Taco's indiscriminate and short-sighted slashing at NASA's budget and to uphold the agency's core mission to explore the unknown in air and space, innovate for the benefit of humanity, and inspire the world through discovery. Now, what's the point of a letter? Come closer. Come closer. Be curious now, because asking why they thought that this was important actually matters. First, they have a policy directive that supports open discussion and diverse viewpoints. NASA supports full and open discussions of issues of any nature, e.g. programmatic or institutional, including alternative and divergent views. Diverse views are to be fostered and respected in an environment of integrity and trust with no suppression or retribution. That is the NPD 1000.C, section 3.55 for those nerds wanting to actually research NASA policy. The culture of NASA prioritizes dissent so highly, it is written as defined in NASA Procedural Requirement 7120.5F. Formal dissent is a substantive disagreement with a decision or an action that an individual judges is not in the best interest of NASA and is of sufficient importance that it warrants a timely review and decision by higher level management. Through the Voyager Declaration, these 363 scientists are making some very important declarations that hold a lot of history and weight behind them as well. To read some of it for you. This document constitutes our formal dissent, our shared commitment to dissenting opinions. We share a commitment to dissenting views in accordance with NASA Policy Directive 1000.0C. We dissent to changes to NASA's technical authority capacities that are driven by anything other than safety and mission assurance. Do you remember the Columbia disaster? The Space Shuttle Columbia and all of her crew were lost 15 minutes before she was supposed to land. Talented crew, who we spent years training, were lost due to negligence. There was a problem with the foam that was used in the space shuttle's construction. NASA knew it was an issue, and they allowed it to be continued to be used anyway. A large piece of that foam broke off from Columbia's external tank and it crashed into one of the wings. Sadly, this was the catalyst that then led to the decommissioning of all the remaining space shuttles. But NASA faced a lot of pushback for letting these safety issues slide, and as a result, they learned an actual lot from the disaster that drastically improved safety, similar in fact to how they learned from the Challenger disaster and Apollo 1 before that. But Taco's cuts would effectively erase the regulations and rules that resulted from the disaster and put workers at risk. We dissent to the closing out of missions for which Congress has appropriated funding. We voted for representatives to approve this funding. They are ignoring the will of the people and the will of the scientists. This is going to create a loss of space capabilities that we as a nation have never experienced before. Once valuable spacecraft and systems are turned off or decommissioned, they're gone. They weren't designed to be turned off and then possibly maybe back on again. We don't know what would happen if we decommissioned them, so why would we even consider doing something like this? They're up there making our lives better. Baffling. We dissent to implementing indiscriminate cuts to NASA science and aeronautics research. Now, as I explained earlier, NASA provides an invaluable service to our economy and society. Prior to Taco's big bullshit bill, NASA made up about 1% of the entire budget. No, wait. Team, do the math for real.
2 seconds later.
It's less than that. It's 0.71% annually. 0.71% of our nation's entire budget is what is funding space. But did you know that investment into the scientific research that goes on there, it has historically seen a 3-fold return on that initial investment? A tiny percent of a total budget with proven results, plus we get to go to space. And we're just supposed to sit here and accept that instead of funding the next cell phone camera or Jaws of Life, we're just going to hand all that money over to the billionaires who will more than likely just spend that money on, a new yacht or a private jet. Fuck that. We dissent to NASA's non-strategic staffing reductions. Do you remember that core mission that I quoted earlier? Well, all of the people that are being yeeted into the private sector have highly specialized knowledge and skill sets that are absolutely invaluable to those missions of exploring space, which also leads us to, we dissent to canceling NASA's participation in international missions. Freaking 55 nations have signed on for the Artemis Accords, a joint agreement between countries like Australia, Brazil, Canada, Germany, Japan, Poland, Sweden, Ukraine, New Zealand, and many, many more. And that agreement outlines best practices and norms for collaborative and civil space exploration. Now, if NASA is barred from collaborating with other countries, our freaking allies, then we will lose so much valuable science and research that simply won't be handled by the profit-hungry private sector. It just won't. So we dissent to the termination of NASA's contracts and grants for reasons unrelated to performance. There is literally no reason for many of these terminations, especially when the budget, read investment, in literally all of NASA has an already stated proven track record of a 3x return on the investment. It means that those jobs are already a net boon for the economy, and we gain literally nothing from cutting them. We dissent to the elimination of programs aimed at developing and supporting NASA's workforce because it undermines the agency's power to innovate for the benefit of humanity. And instead of just paraphrasing and ranting, I'm just going to quote what they actually say in the letter right here. Cuts to diversity, equality, inclusion, and accessibility programming that have already been implemented directly conflict with the agency's core value of inclusion. Eliminating the Office of STEM Engagement would deliver a critical blow to the nation's future space economy's workforce. Now, think about this. What else do you call the directive to hire Black women as computers in the 1940s other than a diversity, equity, and inclusion measure? Thank goodness back then, at least FBR had some wisdom to go seeking the talent and open pathways for humanity to be able to fly higher than we ever had prior. And they wanted to fund all of that and more. Now, screaming about the injustices that Taco's Dunning-Kruger League is inflicting on NASA, and therefore all of us aside, this letter is important for yet another reason. In the United States of America, where it is becoming increasingly likely that you or I could be disappeared for saying the wrong thing, and if you think that none of these scientists are naturalized citizens or green card holders, let's refer back to Project Paperclip and NASA's foundations. These brave scientists, 180 of them, publicly signed their names to this document and then sent it to the Tacos regime's appointed de facto head of NASA, potentially painting a giant freaking target on their backs. If that doesn't honor the legacy of the Hidden Figures women, I don't know what will. And now, as a quick aside, my team tried reaching out to one of the signers of the Voyager Declaration using their official NASA email, and the email bounced back as if it never existed at all. Things are changing as we speak. Now, there is something that you can do right now to show your solidarity with the folks at NASA who are having to put up with the Taco and Chiefs BS. You can add your name to the Voyager Declaration by heading to standupforscience.net/NASA-Voyager-Declaration, and the link is also going to be in the description. So be a badass and follow the example of these incredibly talented Black women who made up Langley's computer pool and kept standing up to the regimes in both ways, big and small, because all of it matters. And we can't let little setbacks like patriarchy, white supremacy, and weaponized financing stop us from making a difference later on down the line. This is your moment. We can be inspired by them. Because of them, we reached the moon and beyond. These women did the hard thing when all the rules were stacked against them for science. And that, to me, is courage. Thank you all so much for listening to Courage, Stories of Everyday Hope. My name is Lacie Madison. This has been a Doculite Media production.